DEI. We can't talk about it enough because, frankly, it's that important. We're fortunate to be joined this week by Danny Tobin, who has experienced camp and life from a unique perspective that will help shed light and reiterate what we all need to be doing at our camps. This is the Day Camp Pod. Welcome back to the Day Camp Podcast. I'm Andy Pritikin, Director of Liberty Lake in the Philly Burbs of New Jersey.
I'm Sam Thompson from Crystal Lake Park District, Crystal Lake, Illinois.
I am Tiffany Gratton-McDuffie from Purposeful Play, both in Chicago, Illinois and Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
And we are back with a continuation of our DEI kind of conversations. We've had some great episodes. We had Kevin Gordon earlier this season from the Sleepaway Camp out in Illinois. We last season had Lance and Shanika, and we are now pulling in a new friend, Danny Tobin from the West Coast, from the left coast. I got to know Danny a little bit from my WAIC affiliation that they dragged me into, and I've really loved it. Lots of really smart, forward-thinking people out there, and Danny is definitely one of them. So Danny, welcome.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm excited to speak with you all today.
Yeah. So why don't you tell our friends out there, like how you got your little circuitous camp story of where you got to, because it's pretty interesting, frankly, I say.
Yeah, definitely. I'll start off by saying I didn't intend to go into camp as a professional career, but I'm here, and I'll tell you a little bit how kind of got there.
I think we can all say that. How many people were predetermined, right?
Yeah.
To be camp people. I mean,
Right.
Lord knows I didn't even know it was a profession. I think most people think it's just something teachers do on the side hustle, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I didn't even know that you could, have a career in camp without owning a camp. So, so that was kind of new to me. But I grew up in Southern California. I am one of 7 children. My mother was a single mother, and all of my brothers and sisters were all adopted. And so we all look very different as well. We grew up in a suburban area just outside of Los Angeles in an upper middle class white neighborhood. So we definitely stuck out amongst our neighborhood, and we kind of got a reputation as the Tobin family kids. So I got started in camp actually at a very young age. At the age of 4, I actually went to the day camp that also had a preschool program. So I actually started at the preschool at that day camp. It was Sunny Skies Day Camp. It doesn't exist anymore. It had to close a while back, but I grew up there from the time I was 4 until I was in high school. I worked there as a high school intern, and then worked as a counselor during my college years. And me and my family were very fortunate actually to go to this camp, Sunny Skies, because there were so many of us, and my mother was a single mother working. Summer camps a lot of summer camps can be very unaffordable for families such as ours, and we got really fortunate that the camp directors and owners at the time allowed us to essentially attend this camp almost free at cost. My mom did spend a lot of time volunteering for the camp during the summer and for the preschool program to give us that opportunity to go to the camp. And that really had a major impact on my life. As I mentioned, I didn't intend to go into camping as a career. I actually went to Chapman University and got a degree in theater performance. At the time, I was, big eyes, star eyes on Hollywood in New York, and like, I'm going to be an actor and director and producer and writer and do all those things. And I did those things for a few years, bounced a little bit back and forth between LA and New York, always coming back to camp during the summer. Which I thought was interesting. But then I kind of got to a point where it's a funny story actually. I was at a audition in New York, and the director just wanted to have a conversation about me, kind of get to know me a little bit more. So I told him a little bit about my working in camp and working with youth and kids. And when I was living in New York, I was also working for an after-school program. And the director at the end of the audition said to me, he's like, it sounds like you like working with kids a lot more than acting. And that was kind of a light bulb moment. And I was like, yeah, I think I do. And so I made a major change and left the performance entertainment industry and moved back to Southern California and started, working. I first worked as an outdoor education teacher, and then I worked as a classroom teacher for a few years, and always again coming back to summer camp during the summer months. And then when a full-time position opened up at the camp I was at, Camp Kinneret, I took advantage of it, and that began my full-time career in camping.
And now you've moved on to a resident camp, right?
Yeah, and a few years ago, actually about 3 weeks before we shut down for COVID, I started a new job as the camp director at Pyles Boys Camp, which is a nonprofit wilderness resident camp working with underserved communities throughout Southern California.
Right. So a few things I want to talk about in your little story. First of all,
Yeah.
I told you this when we spoke a couple of weeks ago. Drama people make the best camp people. So if anybody doesn't realize that, all right, I mean, find your drama people, advertise in the colleges for theater majors and stuff, because gosh, they just have the personality that you're looking for camp counselors. All right, that's the first thing. Second of all, I'm just curious, if you recall, like, how did your mom, with this diverse group of 7 kids, right, and you're in this upper middle class white neighborhood, how did she present diversity to you guys? Like, how did she explain things to you, in that, how did she frame it?
Yeah. So it's funny because I don't remember specific conversations about that with my family. It was kind of always, that's just who we were. We were a multicultural family, essentially. And my mom actually did a nice job of introducing different, faith backgrounds, different historical backgrounds to us. Not we grew up Catholic, but not only did we celebrate Christmas, we actually also had a menorah in our house, and we learned about Judaism and celebrated that faith. I actually have some friends as well growing up that come to find out they were also adopted, and they didn't find out until very late age. And I think you can kind of get away with that when everybody in your family looks the same, but we couldn't get away with that because we all looked different.
Right.
Here I am walking around with a very white Irish mother, and I'm not. I'm of Black descent, and so it's very obvious early on that we were all adopted and different, but we never felt, within our own family unit, we never felt that we were different from each other, or different from the community that we were raised in. And I think a lot of that has to do with my mother getting us involved in our community, in our schools, in our local churches, and in our local summer camp as well.
Tiff, I'm curious, from your perspective, like, any thoughts on that?
I just love that. I just love it. And I think it's such a great call out that there was no hiding. There was no room to hide. We know we're obviously all different, and yet it's our sameness that, just our familial connection of the sameness that brings us together. I think that's, like, I don't know, tweetable, something to that effect, because oftentimes the struggle becomes when when the differences exist, but there's no conversation around it, when there's the elephant on the wall, but nobody wants to mention it. And so literally you were born like DEI, like you were born into a diverse situation that was unavoidable to discuss. So I love that. And I do, Andy mentioned that I had a situation where I was the minority person in both in my school and then in my work environment early on, but my family was very, not ethnically diverse, but my uncles had white wives, and my family, like, our skin tone is just like very varied. And so I just did not make the distinction. I didn't make the distinction that my aunts were white or that my grandmother was light and my mom was dark. For us, it was also just like, we're all family. And so it wasn't until, and people always tease me like I'm slow, and I swear I'm not, I'm just very pure, right? But like, you didn't know your aunties was white until you was in 5th grade. Like, I didn't, because we were just all my grandmother is super fair skinned. And so I love the similarity in our story, but also the difference in that you were acutely aware that you were different and you were still able to have that sameness. I just thought we were all the same. So it's kind of like that the innocence of a child, and really speaks to how all of these extra strongholds that we have that create barriers that we now have to break down are really things that we learn. Like we were not born needing a DEI class. We're born being, one human race. So
yeah.
that's my
Absolutely.
soapbox.
And I kind of had that same kind of revolution when I got a little bit older. It wasn't until I got into high school that I kind of realized that, I even though I'm of Black descent, like I didn't identify a lot with some of the Black community around me. And I think part of that was because growing up, I had gone to the same elementary school, the same middle school, it was the same setting. But when I went to high school, I went to a private school. So I kind of took away from some of my community and some of the friends that I had built over the years, and kind of mixed with some different kids that I hadn't met before. And some of that was some of the Black students that I went to school with, who oftentimes were like, well, you're not really Black because you don't sound like us, you don't identify with these. And that was really the first time where I was like, is there a difference? Does it matter? Like
No, legit. I've been told you're Black, but you're not Black, and this was in my grammar school where all the other children were white. In Virginia, there were not many Black Catholics. I was raised Catholic in Chicago, and there's tons of Black Catholics. I went to Virginia. I was the only Black child, and they're like, oh, we like her because she's Black, but she's not Black. And it took me really this last maybe 3 or 4 years to realize that those were microaggressions, right? Like who knew that there was a term for it? But we were in 5th grade, and the Black people that they that compared me to were people like that ended up with crazy upbringing, like Whitney Houston. I was okay because I was like Whitney Houston, but I couldn't sing. I reminded them of Magic Johnson, and Eddie Murphy. And I'm just like, oh, okay. I don't know if that's what made it okay for them, but just really those types of you're Black, but you're not Black. On the flip side, I had my cousins who were still in Chicago telling me that I wasn't really Black either, because now I'm speaking way too proper. They say rapping, I say rapping, I can't jump double Dutch rope. I'm just like, I'm in the middle.
You have to practice the code switching.
And and I always refused to. So I literally, I think I was just born resilient, because I was just like, all right, I'm in the middle. That means I can kick it with y'all and I can kick it with y'all and you all, so I've really my whole life kind of not not by design, been like the bridge between people of differences, just kind of innately.
So white guy outsider looking in, all right, who's been in youth development for, 30 years now. I see that sense of things for younger kids, okay? And then fast forward to like middle school and high school, and the Black kids are hanging out together and the white kids are hanging out together. Like at some point they start, kids of color start finding their identities, especially when there's other ones around of them. And then I think they become more aware of those microaggressions and all those kind of things like that, right? And something that got brought up to me recently by this girl, Lexi Rogers, who's working with me at my camp, she's majoring in this stuff at college, is the idea that most camps put forth this idea, I call it the Kumbaya culture, where everybody, oh, it's all gonna be great, we're all equal, everything's fine, it's all good, what are you getting all worried about, that kind of thing, right? And yet we're finding out that things aren't so great underneath, that there's a lot of unhappiness, that people just sort of swallow their pride and move along with things until, it builds up. And what we saw last summer is like a fuse. There was a lot of blowing up. But we had been getting plenty of warnings about this prior. So this idea of colorblindness at your camp, right? I think it's a very interesting topic, because most camps, I think, from what I've seen, are either like 95%, white, or they're 95% minority. There's not as many camps in the middle. We're a little bit more towards the middle of my camp, but I think that the more minorities that you have in your camp, the more people of color you have on a camp, the more conflicts that's just going to arise. And this whole colorblindness thing, it's a topic that when I bring it up to really nice, well, thought out, meaningful people, they take it with initial offense at first. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, historically, really, I think going back to the civil rights movement, the country kind of had a shift where, they wanted to just move as far as away we could from division. And so you were start being taught. I mean, I was taught as a kid, in the early mid 90s that, the color of your skin doesn't matter, that we're all equal and we're all the same. And as a kid, what a great thing that sounds like, when you don't know any different, when you don't know any other ways. But then as you get to get older and you realize that all we're doing is just diminishing the importance of your heritage, of your skin color, of where your value. If everybody is the same and everybody's equal, then essentially then nothing about you is important than the other person. And I think that especially for people of the older generation that kind of came out from civil rights and maybe championed and protested during the civil rights movement, they kind of drove that kind of color blindness within the kids that they raised, within their community. And it took me really just recent years, and actually it also took me getting married to a Black woman to actually, and she comes from a Black family, and that was my first introduction to my own heritage, my own culture. And it kind of took that for me to recognize, it's okay for me to be Black and different from, my white peers. And I want to celebrate that with myself the same way I want to celebrate my white peers' heritage and culture as well. And so I think it is really important for us to get away from this color blindness. The idea, at principle, yes, everyone has value. Everybody is, equal in some ways, but we can't just ignore your heritage and what your skin color and what comes from your skin color as well, and giving people a sense of being proud of that, as opposed to it's just not important because we're the same.
I mean, we all know Italians make great food. Right. We all recognize that and celebrate that. Right. I mean, but, so I sort of look at it that way. Like all cultures have their own things that they're proud of. Right. And they like celebrating. Right. And, going back to, Tiff's thing about the black thing, because that hits because the person that says that to her, they're not thinking that they're being offensive. Right. But they are. Right. And it's this kind of like joking around thing that people need to recognize that it's not cool, and we have to educate, not just young people who frankly are a lot easier because they're hearing this all the time and they're understanding this is built into their schools now. It's part of the curriculum, right? It's almost like the 40-year-olds and over are the tougher ones because they're so stuck with this color blindness thing. And I didn't mean anything. I didn't mean to be offensive. I wasn't being hurtful. I don't feel that way. So then why do I even need to apologize? Kind of, sense of things. That's where I struggle with my folks.
Yeah, certainly. And I think, for those who are kind of going through this adjustment, recognize okay, it's okay to make mistakes. Let's, own up to those mistakes and let's, put in the effort. I'd much rather connect with somebody, work with somebody who wants to have a dialogue and conversation about it versus the person who just gets offended. I'm not racist. I see everybody the same. It's like, well, I don't even want to have a conversation with that person if they're just going to say that they see everyone as equal and the same.
When Andy was talking about the age difference too, I was definitely trying to make my staff more diverse this summer and had some success to a degree, but I didn't know how my counselors were feeling about it. I was hoping that it was all positive, and I was very surprised how important it was to them. They were very happy and excited and helpful, and so we're heading the right direction, but I didn't realize how important it was going to be to them. So
yeah, so here you are, Danny, camp director now at your Pyles camp. Hopefully have a normal summer this summer, and your staff orientation, you got a week with these people, right? And we know it's not just staff orientation, it's ongoing staff training, right? How are you thinking about presenting these kind of concepts? We had this guy, Kevin Gordon, on, similar like you with your multicultural family, he's a multicultural camp. Makes it a little bit easier. That's literally their mantra, right?
Yeah.
But when it's not like, your mission statement per se, like, and but yet all your mission statements are like teamwork and integrity and like all these other overriding things that weave their ways into DEI, right? But we need to be a little more specific these days.
Certainly.
Right. So what are you thinking of how you're going to go forward with it, and thoughts for other camp directors who are listening with eager ears right now?
Yeah. I think it's a lot of open dialogue and a lot of conversation. I will say that Pyles is fortunate where it already kind of has a very diverse population. Serving in under-resourced communities in Southern California, it's not just Latino communities or Black communities. There are definitely poor white neighborhoods that we work with as well. So, it is an all boys camp. So we lack in diversity of having girl campers. And that's something where I have to get everyone to kind of recognize. But within our staff and the campers that we serve, we do have a lot of diversity, but also what comes with that is the potential for lack of better term, race wars and infighting. I mean, some of
light skin, dark skin.
Some of our campers do come from gang prevalent areas as well, and that does play a role into it. So the history of Pyles, there has been instances of race kind of fighting up at camp, and so within our staff training, there's already built-in training for our counselors and our campers to be able to sit down and have conversations with the campers about their differences, and in some ways, it's gone as far as that colorblindness that we've seen, and I think that was just the natural progression of how it developed at camp. And so now it's coming into, rather than just that blanket statement here at camp, we're all the same, we all put in the same effort and do the same activities. Now it's just that added layer. It's like, okay, well, let's talk about our differences, recognize the importance of them, and move forward from that. And that's kind of the focus of the DEI aspect and the DEI conversations. And I think for Pyles, it makes it easier because our counselors are already trained to have some of these really, really tough conversations with our campers just by the nature of the population that we serve.
Sorry. So now let's pretend though that you are at like a place like Kinneret or like, a typical kind of camp that doesn't serve, underserved communities, right? I think it's a different conversation, don't you? Because they're not surrounded by it, but yet there are kids there. There is a minority population, and in a way, they're bigger targets, and they need to be, protected and represented, and needs to be discussions on that too. I think it definitely makes it tougher.
Yeah, and I think in those instances, more often than not, the best course of action is to work with an outside consult about, how to address some of these things, especially if you're coming from a position where, you're of the majority and you just don't have the knowledge and the background to that. And I think, first and foremost, it's education. It's educating your staff on what microaggressions are, what they look like for different communities of color, and how they can, it might not be a situation where you have, Blacks and Latinos and whites all coming together. If it's all white camp population, your first step is just educating your counselors and your staff on those differences, and then helping, being intentional about what you set up with your campers and how you educate them too. Camp can be fun. It can be shooting archery and shooting a basket or swimming in the pool, but it also can be very educational too. And I think camps should, even the camps who advertise, we're all fun, we're all, high energy and doing all these things. I think you need to find areas in your program where you are able to educate your camper base and your staff base, and teach your staff how to, initiate those conversations.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point, which is that if you don't have the expertise within, you need to go without, right? People hire Michael Brandwine to come in and do his staff thing because it's better than anybody else. I think that DEI
and people
is
have been doing that for a number of years, bringing in Bob Ditter or Michael Brandwine or any big other camp person, and it's no different with DEI. Hiring a resource, and the key thing is paying them.
Mhm.
People who are at D&DI work, they're not doing it for volunteer. This is what they study. This is what they're making their career out of. And so, equal pay for them is just as important as you would pay a Bob Ditter or a Michael Burnline.
Right. All right, we're going to take a little break just for a sec to talk about our friends at AM Skyer Insurance. So Skyer is about relationships and it's about service. And, I had an interesting situation happen recently where I called AM Skyer because I was having a legal situation to talk to their legal expert. And I called and the phone was ringing like 4, 5, 6 times. And I said to myself, this is weird. Because anytime I call AM Skyer, after one ring, I get Johanna or somebody picks up and goes, "Hey, I'm Skyer, how can I help you?" And I just thought it was so odd. And it turned out that I dialed the wrong number. So I dialed back the correct number and they picked up within one ring and it's, "How's it going? Let me help you," all those kind of things. And it's that little example, it just shows like how on top of the things they are with everything that they do, whether it's workman's comp or God forbid, something breaks or gets on fire with your camp or whatever. We're talking about 100-year-old business, 100-year-old family business where the grandkids are actually in charge right now. Jeff and Amy, they do a wonderful job. And, they're the leading insurance and strategic partner for many of the finest camps in America. They partner with camps to provide public relations, legal, medical, behavior support, and more. Experience the AM Skyer difference at amskyer.com. All right, so we're back, Danny. So in this realm of microaggressions and all this kind of stuff, okay, and I like the way that you mentioned that in your diverse camp population, there's still going to be conflicts. Matter of fact, it could even be more conflicts because people aren't singing Kumbaya as much when there's different people from all these different races, confronting one another, right? So the situation that I think a lot of camp operators are having issues with, grappling with, is when somebody screws up, right? Because these kind of microaggressions are going to happen. They're not all of a sudden going to stop. As a matter of fact, when you're dealing with younger people, 12-year-olds, things like that, who are pretty ignorant, just that's what they are, right? Because they're just young and they haven't learned yet, right? Then I don't know. You're shaking your head, Tiff. You don't think?
I'm writing my list of things that Andy and I are going to fight about. On air, so just.
Well, look, they say things. They say it's like from the mouths of babes. They're going to say things that they don't mean offense by, but they're not developed enough to understand the implications of what they're saying. Right?
They don't have a filter.
Right. Anyway,
that sounds a little better.
I would agree and disagree with that because I have met plenty of young teenagers who know exactly what they're saying and how to say it and when to say it.
Some do, sure. All right, I'm going to lower that to 10-year-olds then. Okay, but so my point is, that's, to me, we could talk about all this theoretical stuff, all right, and they could all read Right Fragility during staff orientation, and we can have an expert talk about it and all that kind of thing. But then when the rubber hits the road, when camp begins and stress levels are high and all that kind of stuff, there is going to be inevitable things that happen, right? And it's how we frame those moments and how we deal with those moments and not sweep it under the rug and not go on, "Oh my God, the world's going to end" alert either. That's where folks are struggling with a lot. And when camps have these instances, any advice on how to move forward with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts again in that staff training and continual training, and really teaching your staff not to be afraid of those moments. More often than not, young staff, they don't react because they don't know how to react. They don't want to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. And so, it might be something that is just kind of swept under the rug. And especially with microaggressions, things that can be said or done, a lot of times they can be very subtle. And, it can even be a situation where, the kid that is being targeted or doesn't even hear, you know, what other kids might be saying about them or doing about them. And so that even gives you more permission to be like, okay, I'm just kind of sweep this on the rug, or we're gonna change the conversation and get on to the next activity or whatnot. But I think you really, really have to train your staff to just, you know what, in these moments, you need to stop what you're doing. You need to have a conversation about it, you know, and that kind of builds also restorative justice too. It's not just a conversation with the one person who is, you know, instigating it. You know, it is a conversation with the entire group. You know, this has been said in our group. You know, I think it's also important that you use it as a teaching moment, and not necessarily a disciplinary moment, especially in those first instances. You know, if it's something that continues and you can see, okay, this is becoming more and more intentional, then you can kind of move into the disciplinary aspect of it. But I think you start with a restorative justice approach where you're sitting down, you're having a conversation about it, and these are all things, you know, when I was, you know, especially at my time at Kinneret, as a member of the leadership team, when we all kind of worked with a subset of different groups. So I would have my counselors and my campers that I would work with, and I would be like, look, if you're not equipped to have these conversations yet as a young college-age staff person, like that was part of my job. Like I will sit here with you, with the counselors, I will model the conversation with your campers, and so you can practice it yourself. But it's a conversation.
No, I agree. I think communication rules the world, right? Like it has to be talked about. And, you know, Andy talked about how we usually do tips of the day, but I'll just throw one in right here, like mindful moments. Like when something happens, you have to seize the moment right there to make it an open conversation, because whether you do or whether you don't dictates how this goes forward. If you try to talk about it in silence with one person, it's like, this is a secretive thing, we should talk about it in private. It creates that aura. If you talk about it openly, then the people who have thoughts, the people who don't have thoughts, the people who have thoughts but aren't willing to say it, it's known. Like camp is all about creating an environment of this is what happens here. And so I remember very early on when in my camp ownership, we used to do these trainings by ourselves, and we're regulated by the state. And so the state would come in and they would write us these non-compliances and they put them on this state website. And I'll be like, this is ridiculously embarrassing. So my goal is like, have no compliance issues. And I would never talk to my staff about them. I would never show them the compliance issues because I was embarrassed. And then I joined forces with the YMCA, and they let my staff train with their staff, and it was just far more collaborative. And they printed out all of the non-compliances and gave it to their staff. Who do you think had the more empowered staff? My staff kind of didn't know what we were doing wrong, what not to do, except for that I was saying it. Their staff knew that we had been reprimanded about it, that it was an area of improvement for us, that it was open, it was to be talked about, and they brainstormed on how to make it better, right? And so then I picked up that practice and took it back to my camp, and I think that that's a powerful lesson in terms of like DEI stuff or racial stuff or gender stuff or just wrong behaviors in general, to just like be bold enough and brave enough to have open communication and conversation around it, so that people who are never going to step up to the plate to talk about something, but when it's open, they will feel they have a voice, and you've created a platform for all people. I said I was going to speak with Andy because all of my Italian friends that can't cook are really feeling ashamed about me. They're just like, there we go. And so it's not a microaggression, but it's real. Like anytime we're using like all or every or like, then it's just like, we know we're going down kind of go the wrong path. And then the other thing I was going to say is, so I do a bunch of work in the corporate space now for like, I work with DEI, ERGs, like employee resource groups around DEI. And I'm an accountant by trade. So there's always like the leaders want to care about revenue, and then the top people care about revenue, and then the managers who have to manage the people are like DEI and employee experience and all of this stuff. And surely my message to them and to every camp owner or leader listening is like, DEI doesn't matter and ROI doesn't matter if there's no EQ. Right? Like emotional intelligence or social emotional learning is the curriculum of camp. And as long as when you're diving into that is the answer to every DEI problem that you think you have, you know, and EQ is all around self-awareness. What are your triggers? Understanding your triggers, understanding how to cope with your triggers, understanding how you respond to your triggers, understanding what your response should be when they happen. So it makes it far less scary because we know how to do this when it comes to teamwork. We know what to do when people aren't sharing, when people have different methodologies on what a team really means. We know how we train when people aren't being empathetic. The only big difference is we're not being empathetic about race. We're not sharing about race. We're not being caring about race. So I always say, like, camp is the perfect place to push we can be thought leaders in this space because
it definitely should be.
Social emotional learning is the curriculum of camp. And without that, it doesn't matter how many anti-bias trainings you give. It doesn't matter if we talk about white fragility. It doesn't matter if we talk about DEI fatigue. As long as you are not rooted and grounded in what it means to be emotionally intelligent in your camp, in your corporation, in your business, in your household, like everything is going to fall apart when, like Andy talks about, when stress comes, when time comes. Like the people who sit in an anti-bias training, who took all these notes about what Black people mean and how they feel and how many years we're in slavery, and like all of that goes out the window when it's like he fell and he bleeding, and I got impreparations at swim camp, who's watching the lifeguards and the kid is over here playing with the bow and arrow. Like nobody's remembering that. But if we always lean back into our emotional intelligence, how can we cope? How can we be resilient? What is our breath work? Like those things, and take the race out of it, not to erase and not as a colorblind, but just saying like, this is no different than every other issue that we face. Mm-hmm. The only reason why we are so shell-shocked and afraid of this issue is because America is so damn racist, right? And because all of the things that have happened over the, pandemic with social unrest. So like, not to erase the race, but it's just to say like, we need to handle this like we handle in the good ways that we handle every other problem.
Yeah. Well, people are losing their patience too. And that's part of it. And I think that a lot of people are worried about saying something because I don't want to step on a landmine and get canceled. I think that that's part of things too.
Take the risk. Be bold. Like, oh, well, you might get canceled. Everybody's not going to cancel you. Mm-hmm. There's tons of racist people who get canceled by a certain subset, and they come back and they say their truth. I didn't mean it. I didn't understand. Ignorance is of the law. You can shoot someone and kill them. If you're ignorant about it, doesn't matter. Like ignorance is not an excuse. And so I think that's where the conversation about right fragility comes up, because it's like, but I don't want to get stuck. You're gonna mess up. You're not perfect in anything else. Name one thing that you're perfect in your life.
Man, we're all humans. We're fallible, 100%.
So it's the same.
And Danny, I'm glad you used the word restorative justice, the phrase restorative justice, because we had Emily Galinsky on last year and she was talking about restorative circles. And that is what we're trying to do here, and by bringing the kids together and like Tiff said, like brainstorming and coming up with ideas and being all part of the solution, like that is what camp is about, for God's sakes. 100%.
Yeah. And I'll add that, the camp directors need to give their staff permission to do this, especially in the day camp world. Things move so fast. Like, I know you got 2 minutes to get your kids out of their bathing suits, dried, and off to the next activity. Like, things move very quickly. But if your staff have permission to slow down, to take time to have these conversations. Like, I am more than happy to get on the phone with a parent who is upset because their child didn't have enough time at archery and say, well, the group was actually having a really, really productive conversation about this event that happened today. I'd much rather have that conversation with the parent.
Talking about the corporate thing, because Tiff mentioned that she's doing a lot of stuff in the corporate space now. We have at Liberty Lake, we have a human resources consultant that's working with us and helping us with a lot of things. And she told me the other day, we were talking about DEI, and she said, the big catchphrase now is DEI B being belonging, because she's like, you could put into place all this DEI stuff in the world, and in the end, if you have a person of color that works for you that don't feel like they belong, it all doesn't mean crap, right? So you really need to talk to these people and find out what, get their sense, are they feeling part of the community? Are they feeling part? And what's holding them back? What are the things? And we talked about these microaggressions. We use that word a lot, right? Let's, some of these things like, Tiff, your hair looks so beautiful. Oh, I love your skin. It's always that. Like, there's so many little things. And I had so many instances this summer with people coming to me with like a laundry list of like, it's just unbelievable. Talk about potholes that white people could step in. Just like unbelievable amount of things that most people don't think twice about saying or doing. And I'm not going to sit here and start listing them, but go online and Google them for God's sakes, or read White Fragility. They're all over the place, and calling them out. I really feel like there needs to be a 101 about this at camps, because people don't know what they're messing up unless they know what they should be, avoiding, right?
Yeah, I think the biggest microaggression I've had in the summer camp world is, oh, you don't need sunscreen. Like, no, I do need sunscreen. I don't want to get skin cancer.
Yeah.
So I might not tan or burn as easily as others, but I still need sunscreen.
Yeah.
I've had that. And on the flip side, because we are a camp who's outside, most of the day, we don't have huge facilities like Andy said. And I have a parent base that their kids are first generation campers, right? Like, they didn't go through camp and blah, blah, blah. So they'll come to school and they'll come to pick them up. You got black. And my whole, he was black when he got here, he's still black when he leaves the sun, and that's why they need sunscreen, and that's, because the sun tints skin, all skin, not just, so he didn't get black. He was already black when he got here. And so I think it's important. It's a conversation where parents sometimes get it wrong, right? And you don't even realize, the deeper thing behind her telling her child that he got black is rooted in the darker you are, the more ashamed you are to be black, as opposed to the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. So that's why I say it's all about EQ. It's all about how emotionally intelligent you are. How is what I'm saying going to affect the next person? What environment are we creating here? How are we living our core values? And I love that. So I'd like to know if, when you're training, do you lean into, emotional intelligence as opposed, or is it strictly just a diversity conversation that you're having, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on the audience that I'm speaking with, and I really like to have the conversation in the training kind of flow naturally. And sometimes you have to start a very basic level, and it kind of stays at a basic level. And then other times you can kind of gloss over the basics and kind of dive into the nitty gritty of it, and really kind of tie in and use that emotional intelligence and kind of get away just from the surface level stuff. But luckily with my work at Pyles, like I said, so many of our we actually have a really, really high rate of counselors who are former campers and have gone through the program. This past summer, we ran our staff, all of our staff were returning, had been campers, had been a counselor before. And so, right off the bat, you can start at a very high level of training versus when you have somebody brand new to either the program or to these, concepts and this idea of DEI, you kind of have to start more at a basic level. And so I think that just a lot of kind of depends. And like I said, I really do like to have my training and conversations kind of flow naturally, have an outline, and who knows, I could start beginning by teaching how to play Gaga, and 15 minutes later, it might dive into a conversation about DEI at Gaga. So.
That's great. So Danny, tell us a little bit about what the conversations and such that you've been having with WAIC as with the DEI committee and stuff that you guys have put together.
Yeah, so with our DEI committee, WAIC is the Western Association of Independent Camps. I currently am the board advisor for our DEI committee, and it started after the George Floyd protests. Obviously DEI started way before them, but the work that that WAIC saw the importance of putting this work into happened after that. And actually, my son was born May 23rd. During all these protests. And so me and my wife are in the hospital watching this on the TV. And then I get back from my paternity leave, and I have all these emails in my inbox about this DEI group. And so, I jumped on, and from there, our initial focus was a lot on race and minorities in summer camp. But we've evolved since then. The whole purpose of our group is to be a resource for the WAIC camp directors and the larger camp community as well. We started off by just putting out a newsletter, a monthly newsletter of different resources, podcasts to listen to. You guys were referenced in one of our newsletters, I believe, and also just influential people in the space, articles to read. One of our newsletters just had a whole definition, like a definition. It's like, what are all the DEI terms you need to know? And so just kind of as a resource. And then, so that was kind of our first way to kind of conquer this, is to be a resource, provide education. And then as we've kind of developed, it's kind of evolved into any aspect of diversity and inclusion, working with the LGBTQ community, how to work with that at your camp as well, and doing more education. We did a successful DEI panel at our recent WAIC conference last November, and that was a great time. It was just for all the WAIC directors and owners just to ask open questions about what they're struggling with, and just, again, it's just that communication. It's an environment where nobody is judged. Nobody is should feel ashamed about what their point of view is or where they're coming from. Let's just break that all down and just ask the question and let's talk about it. And then from there, we're looking into ways where we could create DEI assessments for each camp. There are people in this space who are already working on DEI assessments, and a lot of DEI assessments come from a more corporate business kind of mindset, and we really want to develop a DEI assessment that works on a broad level for lots of camps. Every camp is different, obviously, even in the day camp world and the resident camp world. The structure of your program, your emphasis is all very different, but we want to find something that could be used on a broad level to help assess your program. And it's not just assessing what you need to work, where your program is at, but it's also assessing what are the steps you can take to improve your DEI efforts within your program. So that's kind of a long-term goal, but it's something that's being built over time.
That's great. It would be awesome if you could send some of those resources over to Matt, and he could post them on the Day Camp podcast website in the show notes. All right.
Yeah, actually, I shared with him the WAIC DEI page, which has links to our newsletters and our mission statement, and a way to subscribe to it as well. So we kind of paused our newsletters during last summer and more recently, but it's something that we're going to start pushing out a bit more.
Excellent. I'm going to talk about my friends at CRS in a second, but Danny, when I come back, we're going to ask, because now you've been on both sides of the tracks now as far as day camp and resident camp. And one of the things we always ask our resident camp folks that come in is, what is the sleepaway camp spirit? Like for day camps to capture what you guys do when you have them as a captive audience overnight. Okay, so we'll get back to that. But first, let's talk about CRS, Commercial Recreation Specialists, the fine purveyors of the best recreation solutions to keep camp going strong. Check out their website at crs4rec.com. And I want to tell you about this thing they got called the Zoom Flume. All right, it's this big inflatable, 25-foot thing, and you get it in sections. You can put multiple ones together, and you can make the most giant slip and slide come down a hill and have them splash into whatever kind of wet thing that you want. It's soft. It's got the same kind of material as like a moon bounce kind of thing, but it's made for outdoors. And it's just a heck of a lot of fun. You can run water on it. You can put some soap suds on it if you want to really slick it up. And like I said, if you got a hill and you could put multiple ones together and have them splash into like a lake or a pond or something like that, even better. So the Zoom Flume, check it out, crs4rec.com. CRS is serious about fun. All right, Danny. So what do you think? Sleepaway camp spirit. So what is it that sleepaway camp does that day camp we try to capture, and what can day camps do to capture that? Little ideas on that.
Yeah, I think initially it's the community and the bond that cabin groups form. At resident camp, they come in, you get them. They're not going home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You're not getting 30 phone calls from parents at the end of each day. Typically, that was kind of like a light bulb to me when we were running camp last summer. I'm like, I'm not talking to parents as much as I used to. anymore, but I think the community that you can form in a resident camp, just living in that you're living together, you're going to the bathroom together, you're using the same facilities or eating meals together, and I think that is is initially the kind of the difference. And there are day camps that do similar things. I've coming from Canaret, it's a day camp that in a lot of ways the groups are kind of structured in a resident camp way, where you have the exact same counselor, you're with the same campers each time that you're coming. Even if you don't come every day, the campers within that group stay the same throughout the entire course of the session. And I think that's something that more and more day camps could look into and follow in, rather than just you come in, you sign in, and you go with this age group over here, and you might have the same counselor, you might not have the same counselor, because it's about community. It's about building that community. And if you can have the same campers together with the same counselors, you can build that community much more easier. And if not, it's just building community each day. You build a new community, and I think again, things move so quickly a lot of times in day camp, but they don't move as quickly in resident camp. And a lot of times I'll tell the people who ask the difference, and I'll use the analogy of the sprinter and the marathon. Day camp, you're sprinting. You come in every day, you start from the start line and you sprint all the way to the finish line where the kids go home. At resident camp, if you come in with that same sort of energy, you're going to burn out in the first 2 days. You have to pace yourself. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So that's kind of what I always share.
No, that's great. And I think that the whole thing about the group being together sort of ties into our DEI conversations here, is that there's going to be trials and tribulations. There's going to be compromises. There's going to be arguments. There's going to be kids that mess up, right? There's going to be, social justice, restorative justice circles, right? Like that kind of stuff. I think that a lot of day camps, the group is more like, it's like, let's just herd them to get to the next place. And well, we don't have much time. Like you said earlier, Danny, we got to get changed for swim. We got to do this. We got to do that. Excuses. You got to make that time intentional and give them some group time so that they could have these talks, and they could, because it's that you're not going to build trust otherwise. And then you're not going to build community, and you're not going to get that feel, that, right. These are your friends. These are your teammates, right? These are your fellow soldiers, whatever. Yeah. So that's great. We've asked that question a lot, and we never got that answer. So kudos to you for that. All right, we're going to wrap it up. Sorry, Sam, we're going to do the tip of the week next time, because we got to keep this baby flowing. But before I wrap it up totally, for those of you watching YouTube, I'm wearing my Everwood Day Camp scarf right now. Okay. Because I'm wearing it because I wanted to give a shout out to Dane and Jamie Pickles, who have been on the show before. They run a big day camp outside of Boston, and both during these pandemic years have also been battling cancer at the same time, and yet they have run in 2020 and in 2021, and they are forging forward, and they really are an inspiration to all. When everybody thinks, oh, this is so tough, this is so hard, yeah, just imagine if you were going for chemo treatments as well. All right, so they are really, really unbelievable, and we are in awe of you guys. So I want to give a shout out to them, but I also want to give a shout out to the Go Camp Pro team at AM Skyer and Commercial Recreation Specialists for allowing us to bring this podcast to you. If you like what you hear, then you should subscribe to the Day Camp Pod on your favorite podcast platform. Check out the show notes from this and other episodes at daycamppodcast.com, as well as contact info for the show, our guest, Danny Tobin, and links that he will provide from the WAIC stuff, and for me and Sam and Tiff as well. Thanks for listening and making yourself a better Day Camp Pro. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of the Day Camp Pod.